All right, everyone, I want to welcome you here. I'm Lou Basenese, MDB Capital's President and Chief Market Strategist. I have the pleasure today to be joined by Tyler Korman, the VP of Research from Invizyne Technologies, and Yannick Bomble, a key scientist and researcher with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you making time. We had scheduling so many different conflicts here. It's a late Friday afternoon in the summer. So I really appreciate you making time with that consideration. So before we jump into the topic of conversation today, I do just have to get some disclaimers out of the way. We are possibly going to make some forward-looking statements. Because of that, I encourage you to read the latest SEC filings that Invizyne has placed with their registration statement to review the risks and uncertainties associated with the company, the technology, and the proposed offering of shares. So with that being said, let me tell you why we're here today. We've gathered this group to really bridge the gap. I come from the investment world, like many of you, and we have two preeminent scientists with us to really talk about the technology and how they're working together. Because in October of last year, you'll recall that Invizyne was selected to be part of a Shell Game Changer Accelerator program that is sponsored and powered by the NREL, where Yannick works. The purpose of this program is really to provide promising clean tech startups with access to financial resources, state-of-the-art facilities, and then technical experts to work with, like Yannick. And it's really focused on discovering and advancing emerging clean technologies with the potential, in their words, to dramatically alter the future global energy landscape. So big overarching purpose, a very big award for Invizyne Technologies. And we wanted to put that into perspective for investors. What does it mean? So it's my job as the resident layman to try and get these two geniuses in science to help us understand that. So without further ado, let me start with you, Yannick. Let me ask you, it says here, if I look at your bio, that you have research interests in development of thermophilic bacteria, the characterization, modeling of biomass and degrading enzymes, which is a bunch of gobbledygook to a guy like me. So explain to me what it is you're passionate about. What do you do? What have you been doing? And then how does that relate to Invizyne?
So basically we're trying to do whatever we can to power, a new bioeconomy, right? And so my role at NREL have been there for about 15 years. And I have a group of about 20, 25 people. Historically, we've worked on how do you convert biomass, so like trees and grasses and so on. How do you break them down to like basically sugars, things that microbes can take in and actually make products from, right? So ethanol is a good example of this. So how do you break this really complex architecture of the plant cell wall, whatever is in a tree and so on, get it down to those monomers, convert it, and convert that at really high amounts of those biochemicals, right? And so historically, we've done this. We still do the deconstruction of that biomass down to monomers, but we've realized that there are some, issues with microbes. They don't like to make certain products. Certain feedstocks are toxic and so on. And so that's when we got interested in cell-free biocatalysis. That was probably 6 years ago. And we started to kind of look at the landscape, right? What are people doing? And of course, we came across those great papers from Tyler with a lot of their early successes, right? And that's how we kind of got interested. We had some technologies of our own to basically put enzymes on protein scaffolds. We thought that could be interesting. That's when we started talking to Tyler. And at that point, Tyler was at UCLA, right? And that became a collaboration at Invizyne once Invizyne came online.
Okay, so it was an outreach from you and your team at the NREL to Tyler and the team over at UCLA.
Yes, at the very beginning, yes. We were so impressed by the results they got in those papers that we wanted to reach out and talk to them.
Okay, no, that's good. It's a great segue too, because Tyler, I wanted to ask you, for the benefit of people that aren't completely familiar or haven't heard it recently, just the genesis story for you. You were, you're a co-founder and VP of research now at Invizyne, but you started with the other co-founders at UCLA. What was the aha moment where you knew you found something different, and then how did that lead into your collaboration here with Yannick?
Sure. And, just before we get started, I can still remember when Yannick actually, might have been his first meeting, we came and had a coffee at Court of Sciences. And I don't think we really knew each other very well back then. And so it was kind of like, what are you talking about? But, eventually we figured out we spoke the same language. And this is where we're at today. So my journey started I think there's some overlaps with what Yannick has been doing actually. So I was a structural biologist. I was studying the way enzymes do the chemistry of life. I focused on those enzymes that make natural products. These are used by bacteria for chemical warfare to make the antibiotics and anti-cancer compounds that you use today, tetracyclines, these different types of drugs, so on and so forth. That was great from a research perspective, but there was not really much applied science there. And so I moved to UCLA in 2008 to work on these more applied projects. It happened that Jim Bowie, so this was the lab at UCLA who I joined, didn't have an energy-focused project, but they were getting money from the DOE. And so he figured I should have an energy-related project. And so pretty much built that that whole platform from the ground up, starting with an idea that Jim had to provide alternatives to making biodiesel more efficiently, first with an enzyme solution and then with a engineered cell. Turns out engineering cells is really hard, as I think anybody who's familiar with that process will know. They're really complex, and literally the aha moment was Jim walking out of the door and saying, "We just published this paper in a relatively high-profile journal. This sucks. We need to change the way we do things. Let's go cell-free." And so, you know, it's interesting when scientists say things like
what
that.
do you, when a scientist, when he says that, your boss says that, and you go, I mean, is it just like, how do we do that?
You look at each other for a minute and you say, okay, like you're a little crazy, but
Has he lost his mind?
But then you start thinking about it a little and you're like, you know, I could actually do this. And it helps to be, I mean, at the time, I'm 45 now, this was 2012. So, you know, I was a little bit younger. I was naive enough to think that it might be possible. And I had worked with these long pathways that are involved in, we call it secondary metabolism, because it's the same process that like your body's used to make fats and energy. The bacteria just use a slightly modified version to make these natural product, these drugs. So I was very familiar with things that you would want to make and how metabolism works. And I knew a lot about enzymes and was like, yeah, let's just try it. You know, I mean, these are the low-hanging fruits, the easy things we could do very quickly. And we just started building it out. We kind of lucked into an early grant from the Department of Energy through ARPA-E to develop terpenes. It was not just that it was a good idea, but the program manager also loved terpenes. And so it helped that we had a terpene.
So what's a terpene for the layman? What's a terpene?
So terpene are those chemicals in like lemons that give lemon, like it makes lemon smell like a lemon. Limonene is an example. Okay. Perfumes, most of those are terpenes or esters, but most of them are terpenes. And so typically they're used as flavors and fragrances. They're used as attractants in plants. And so
okay, I'm glad I asked, because I was thinking turpentine. That was the first thing that came to mind. So
that is actually a terpenoid compound as well.
Okay.
And so you actually were not too far away. And the nice part is that, I mean, you can light turpentine on fire, right? And it burns. It's a hydrocarbon. And so you can, in theory, use these terpenes as fuels. And so that was why the DOE was interested in it. It's a relatively complex pathway. We built it out. And, you know, after we had published, so those were some of the publications Yannick was talking about. We had demonstrated that you could actually do all of these complex biosynthetic pathways cell-free. And we were looking for what was the next thing, how could we apply it? But we had demonstrated that it worked for terpenes, it worked for isobutanol, which is a second-gen biofuel. It worked for bioplastics. And so that was kind of where this started. But we were initially using just glucose, like sugar that you bought from research grade. And part of the interest after we got to know Yannick a little bit better was, well, he had access and all this knowledge to carbon feedstocks, how that supply chain actually works. What's the on that side of it? What are some of those technical and economic considerations that you have to think about if you're going to build a system that's eventually going to be commercial? In addition to his interest in other applications for cell-free that could also touch the bioeconomy. So it was a really great. It took us a little while, I think, to start working together, but
and I think that that's the other point. I think you said time, right? I mean, it took you guys time. I want to get into how you started working together, what you're working on, and then how that led to the grant. But I think for investors, it's important to understand that this isn't something, I know, although the company is newly founded and going to be newly public, that the technology and science and research behind that, again, like you said, believe it's 2008 that you started at UCLA working on this, or at least, the
2000,
foundational work.
2008 to 2012. Yeah, it was right in that range.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking 15 plus years, and then Yannick and a team of 25 researchers working on their side of the equation in terms of deconstructing biomass into things that molecules that could be fuels. Has been going on for a decade plus as well. So how do these two, following enzyme reactions to produce something, and the other line of science from Yannick, how did the two meet, and what are you working on together specifically? Where did it start, and then how did it lead to the grant?
Yeah, so at first, when I reached out to Jim and Tyler, it was really an exchange of enzymes, right? We just wanted to try a few things, and but like any collaborations, it takes time to develop, and then you realize you have a lot of things in common, right? For example, we have a ton of experience with enzyme engineering and techno-economic analysis, so knowing how much things cost when you're talking about making a fuel, commodity chemicals. That is something that people want to know. They're not going to pay $15 a gallon to power their car, right? Or even for jet fuel and so on. And same for the biomass. How much does it cost? How much can you get? There's also life cycle analysis. How good is it for the planet and so on. And then at NREL, we do a lot of things with separation as well, right? So we had a few projects before the game changer, right? We had one that's just finishing up. That's called a technology commercialization fund, and basically it's something that DOE has to connect a company with NREL so that you can develop technologies together. And basically, it's made to enable like a technology that's almost to the point of being commercial, right? And really push it over that hurdle, right? And so that helped us a lot to kind of see what we had in common, identified areas where NREL could help. And, so those areas are the ones I said before, like enzyme engineering and so on. That's what we did exactly in this particular project. But then we talked about what else could we do that would actually help Invizyne, because, NREL is a national lab. That's what we want to do. We want to occupy that space between academia and industry, where we can basically kind of help technologies get going, right? And things are sometimes too risky for industry to actually fund internally. That's kind of what we specialize in, right? And so we talked about.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because I want to, people may see the face value of the game changer grants, $250,000. Doesn't seem like a lot in technology development, especially in light of Invizyne. They've had, I think, 13 plus million in other grant funding, but it's not about the monetary capital, is what you're saying. It's really the intellectual capital and sharing of that that is helping accelerate. Is that accurate? And how do you do that, right? Because I know part of the focus is accelerating time to market. You mentioned it. How do we bridge the gap to commercialization and compress that? So how does that happen?
So it happens, first of all, with a relationship and with an open sharing of both ideas and information that is with a specific target in mind, right? And so because we had this relationship beforehand, we knew what NREL's capabilities were. We knew kind of how they thought about these problems, and then applying this for the game changer to accelerate the progression of isobutanol as a second generation fuel, knowing like what are the problem points that we are likely, are these actual difficulties, how does it relate to the economics, the life cycle analysis, all of these different things. And then could we also use some of their capabilities on the separation side to potentially address some of these things. So that's kind of how it comes about. In practice, how it actually happens is, we have this active collaboration that has made the flow of information, I think, very easy and natural. We trust that, Yannick and his group are really good at what they're doing. And, I think they trust us that we're quite good at what we do. And so, because you trust that what the information is true, then it makes it that much easier to push it forward, to answer these difficult questions. I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe Yannick, you have a different perspective.
Yeah, no, I think Yeah, I think you said it all. I think one thing we've really appreciated working with Invizyne over the years is that how much they're willing to share. Right. Of course, we have all the agreements in place and so on, because everything has to be protected, and of course it should be. But Invizyne has been really good about, compared to some other companies we worked with in the past, where it's not as fruitful because they just don't share as much. And so if we don't have all the information, we can't really give you all the answers that you need. And I think Invizyne has been great at this. If you're doing a technical economic analysis, you need all the information that they have internally, right? And for us, then we have the experience taking things from the benchtop to basically a pilot plant and an industry, right? NREL has a big pilot plant. We know how things will scale and so on. We can put those in the models. We know how separation will work. When you have like 500, 1 million gallon reactor, that's really different from just working at the bench, right? But for this to be useful, we need all the information we can get from the company. And I think Invizyne has been great at doing this. And I think it's why this collaboration is working so well.
So the open exchange of information, the comparing of ideas, but then also what I'm hearing you say is, you read in a press release that there's state-of-the-art facilities, but give us some context. So you mentioned the 500, I couldn't catch it there. How big was the reactor? So does Invizyne have access to that through your collaboration? If you and your team obviously deem, hey, this is a resource that could be helpful in accelerating this technology.
So those volumes were volumes you usually find in industry when things are, going like full scale and so on. At NREL, we have, reactors in the pilot plant that I don't exactly remember how much, but 9,000 liters, for example. I think we have 2 of those. We can do fermentations, traditional ones, but we can also envision doing large self-free reactions or produce the enzymes that Tiger would need. Gets a little complicated to know who has access to what. Usually, there's a fee for service. But of course, we can write grants that would allow basically Invizyne to work with us to get access to it, right? So I can't say it's free, but because, we have to get money in to do those projects. Either the money comes from the company or it comes from a grant basically that we can write together. But at least they have the access to the know-how, right? Even if you don't use a reactor, there's a lot we know about how things will scale from 1 liter to 9,000, 10,000 liter. But I think ultimately, yes, I think it would be really nice for Invizyne to have access to that, because knowing how things scale at 10,000 liters, I think is usually where things stop breaking, right? With microbes and so on. That's where people realize, oh, well, maybe the aeration is not good enough, or the mixing is not what it should be at that scale and so on. There's a lot you realize when you start scaling your process.
Yeah. And I think go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say some of the early.
Go for it, Tyler.
It's all you, man.
Some of the early projects that we had were focused just on that, right? The TCF project was using some of the NREL infrastructure to solve some of the pain points that we had early on in terms of enzyme production and some of those logistics. So exactly what Yannick said, like that's how we view this, right? Is how is it win-win for both Invizyne, NREL, and the bioeconomy, the nation generally. So
yeah. Tyler, I was just going to ask you, from your standpoint, obviously startup economy, right? Startup company, limited capital resources, limited personnel resources. What does it mean to you and the team to have collaboration like this and access to the intellectual capital, the facilities, et cetera? Like how can you contextualize that even roughly, like how fast that's helped move things along, or just what it's meant from the development of the company standpoint?
Yeah, it's essential. As a startup, whose resources are limited, you gotta figure out what are the best ways. Like, how do you get this stuff funded in the first instance? How do you keep it going, and then how do you do that as fast as possible, knowing that you have a limited amount of resources? So if we can use expertise and resources at NREL to help solve a problem that we have, then we should do that. And that only happens if you foster these relationships and you build them as well, because at the end of the day, we're people working together as well. And so, the finance is part of it, but it's also kind of that trust. But like within that, this has been an essential, not just the grants, but also the work that we do with NREL to push the status of isobutanol production forward, so we can understand also moving forward, what are those pain points that we need to adjust in the next iteration as we get closer and closer to scale? Because that's just as equally important to know. The earlier you know that, the faster that process happens as well. And so these come in these come as like TEAs, LCAs, different types of aspects like that that inform that next generation of development.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think it's important for investors to hear, and unsolicited, both of you talked about being commercial minded. How do you move things from the research to the application? Because I think the fear for investors normally is you get some really smart people pursuing research in a lot of directions, but there's no focus towards an end goal, right? And that's okay in an academic setting or a government research setting, but in a commercial setting where we're trying to, to bring a company to market, I think that's a fear. So I appreciate you kind of providing that perspective. I want to kind of dive off of that a little bit too for you, Yannick. I mean, obviously you mentioned you have a team yourself, 25 people that work with you. You see a lot of different technologies or approaches and science. Help us, from your view of the world, how does what Invizyne is doing, how could it be potentially a really big deal? Like what's different and why could this cell-free approach really be a game changer to be cliche in that sense?
Yeah, I was going to say before you asked the question, a national I have been there for 15 years, right? 15 years in that business. And the more I'm there, the more I want to have an impact, right? Because I see new technologies coming online. I see biorefineries coming online and closing and issues happening and so on. And, a lot of things are related to, yes, the deconstruction of biomass, but also the degrading and the fact that you don't get access to a lot of different products. And I think when I saw cell-free and the, early success from Tyler, it's really, what can you do with it now? You can get access to a product space basically that's not accessible with microbes or sometimes with chemical catalysis, because chemical catalysts will need high pressure, high temperature. Sometimes it's tricky to do that. Microbes are just going to die if you make, all those molecules that you need to basically offset petroleum derived molecules, especially the ones that go into plastics, for example. So I think what, Invizyne is working on, it is a game changer because it gets you access to those different chemicals. And also when you talk about a biorefinery or the bioeconomy as a whole, right? The fact that you have those enzymes that can produce, products much quicker in smaller volumes and so on. You can think about the life cycle analysis too. You have smaller ponds to treat your water. You have less power needed for, sterilizing all your tanks and all this that you have with microbes. There's a lot of things that are basically good for the cost, but also the life cycle aspect of your new bioeconomy. So I think it is a game changer in a lot of different respects.
Yeah. So to just make sure I understand, I mean, you said originally it's the opening up new markets essentially, or new molecules that you could make that weren't available through the other approaches that you've seen. I mean, combined with doing traditional things more efficiently, more cost effectively.
Right. Because they're available to the other, approaches, but it just would be more expensive. They would be not as good for the environment, right? Where you deal with high pressure, high temperatures to make all of those chemicals. If they come from biomass, if you still need a lot of heat and a lot of, power generation to actually make them, it's still not good, right? So if you can find a way that's really based, low temperature, low pressure, that can make all those interesting fuels and chemicals, I think this is a big deal.
Yeah. Tyler, you're going to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, yeah, I agree.
That's good. Shortest answer today. Let me just kind of talk through just what are some milestones in the collaboration, right? So investors always tend to be milestone or inflection point driven. So for that standpoint, what are things that you're looking at in the collaboration that would be, staging, gating items to move to the next phase, or key accomplishments that would lead to commercialization, just to help us understand what that might look like as this unfolds and the time associated with that?
Yeah, I can take the first step of that. So the initial milestones were to develop a very detailed techno-economic analysis and to validate those TEAs that we had done internally, both on the enzyme production side and on the bioconversion side, from a variety of different sugar feedstocks into your final product. So you get a very accurate idea using all of the data that NREL and the National Lab and all that information that they have accumulated over the years to basically refine those models that we had built. So that's one of the deliverables. Then also, so
it's like a feasibility, like with accurate data, and say, hey, we think in theory, but now we have data that says this is feasible.
That's right. Given, X, Y, Z assumptions in terms of productivity and how much you could make. Translating that then into a life cycle analysis to figure out what's the actual carbon benefit at the end of the day that this process would, because that's a very unique skill set and something that NREL is very, very good at. And on the third side, we know that one of the largest costs of isobutanol production from a bio-based system is how well you can isolate it, and that heat, that energy cost that's related to that. So can you develop new methods for that isolation of that chemical that are both efficient and cost effective from a cost and energy standpoint? And so those are the three metrics that we were going after within this grant. And I think we've made good progress towards all three.
Yeah, all right, now the professor is going to grade you on that progress quickly.
I mean, game changer, like financing that project was, shale game changer, right? I think was a big deal because it was kind of a first in terms of people have done those TEA models, LCA models, separations for everything you make with microbes, right? With cell-free, it's kind of new, except for Invizyne, nobody had really done, a TEA of those processes, right? And so being able to do that now, it's a first off, right? Same for the separation. Every time I show, cell-free based things, research and so on at conferences, people always ask me about the separation. How is it going to work with the enzymes? Are you going to keep the enzymes in there? Are you going to do separation as you're making your product? Is it an end thing? And all those things are important to figure out because they come into the cost, the life cycle analysis, and so on. So game changer, financing this project, I think will be really good for us to learn more and for the company as well. When you go in front of the investors and say, look, those are numbers from, NREL's TEA team is internationally known, basically. That's what they do. That's a reference to the US or even in the world. So if you can put that in front of people and say, yes, this is for real, then I think that changes things.
Yeah, it's kind of like peer-reviewed research, right? I mean, this is third-party validation. So what's the next steps, right? Where does this go from here, and what other projects are you working on that can help investors know what commercialization could look like? Is there a defined end time for the grant and what you're working on? Or I know there's a lot of questions in there, so pick one.
So Yannick, maybe you can talk about the timeline in terms of like when the results are done and how we talk about that, and then I can talk about kind of what we think about next.
Right. So in terms of timeline, so those projects, I can't remember exactly what was given to us at the beginning, right? I think it's usually between a year and 2 years. We decided to do a year. We wanted a short timeline because those things we're working on are crucial for Invizyne, and so we decided to put a lot of efforts in directly. So I think we have probably another 6 months in the project. I think the big milestones will be done by the end of August, right? We'll have that TEA, that LCA model. We'll have basically a list of separation technologies that could work and how do they scale and so on, how enzymes react to those and all this, right? So I think we have six more months to go. That's the end of this project as it is, but already there'll be 2 big things will provide the company, right, that will help them. And of course, after this, we have plenty of other plans for going after different grants, right? Another one of those TCFs, the type of DOE funded research that I talked about, that's really about getting those processes to market and so on. But I'll let Tyler kind of elaborate on this.
Yeah, and so the way that I look at it also is, based off of some of these results, it'll allow us to say, okay, well, this actually might be a pain point, right? Could be that enzyme production and what host. And so this is something that we can work with NREL together through a TCF project to dial in further on top of what we've already done internally at Invizyne. Additionally, we can say, okay, well, these are the economics of this process. Actually, NREL already knows the economics of a different process that uses a different feedstock. We can actually use that feedstock potentially to upgrade into a different commodity chemical. And we have some proposals along those lines as well to continue to work on other aspects of chemicals that you can't get that would contribute to the bioeconomy. That might be a little bit longer term. That's why we would work with NREL to develop those, but still needs some of that fundamental knowledge as well. So we can also take information that we have from our business development to say, okay, this is actually what the market is saying. These are products that could be useful, after you make isobutanol, because we already know that is a market-driven need. But there are, molecules XYZ that come off the back end of that, that we can also apply our research to.
So it sounds like this is, this collaboration started at least informally without the grants, and should continue whether grants or not, just because of what you're finding and the overlap, which leads me to really the last question I always want to end on. For investors, we have opportunity costs, right? We have to make a choice, this investment or that investment. No different, from my vantage point, for researchers and scientists. You got to pick what area of expertise you're going to go down, what path, what hypothesis you're going to test. I guess my question to you, Yannick, to end, and then we can go to Tyler, is you mentioned you decided at a certain point you wanted to have an impact. So what excites you? Like, what's from your perspective about Invizyne's technologies that excites you about the impact it could have? And again, understanding this is your opinions based upon your background and not a guarantee of what's going to happen. So,
right. Well, again, as I said earlier, I think with a lot of other technologies I've looked at, I've always felt like we're going to be limited to that one product. That maybe then we need, or that intermediate, that we need to upgrade catalytically to something that would be directly usable, right? I think with the technology that Invizyne is developing, I can see that we can get to those products directly. We can get there we can make a lot of them, make them fast. We can be carbon efficient. That's a big deal, because you guarantee more of your carbon basically from your starting material ends up in your product. And I think this is a game changer as well, because that's what you want for it to be basically a sustainable process, right? So I see basically access to a lot of molecules that usually are made with petroleum and that are hard to make with bio-derived feedstocks and starting materials. So I think that's really what I'm excited about. And I can see that this will not only be for isobutanol, which is what this particular grant is about. It will be for countless chemicals that we need, maybe some of them to replace plastics as they are known now, right? And be able to really recycle plastics instead of just, sending them somewhere and pretending they're recycled. So I think I see this as really a big deal. I'm really excited about the next 5-10 years of the work that we'll be doing with Invizyne, see where they are.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity. But Yannick has a unique perspective in terms of the market and the state of the bioeconomy. What things have benefit for replacing petroleum and what that effect might be on the environment. And when those align with what Invizyne's core business model is, right? These are the things that we also are already working on. And we can bring the cell-free expertise, and then NREL also has, in addition to everything else that we've talked about, expertise in enzyme engineering and high throughput, and they can contribute in other ways as well. I think that it just makes sense. Why wouldn't we continue to work together? Because it's in line with what we were both already doing. And I think it's been a great relationship, both professionally and personally. And it's been great.
Well, look, I think it's been extremely helpful because, from the investment standpoint, as bankers, we always talk about platform technologies that can address multiple markets that are billions in scale. And I know that to some investors that those kind of pie in the sky statements just don't seem real or tangible. But so I appreciate you giving the on the ground, real perspective on the research and saying like, hey, look, this is something now. We have a grant that's accelerating towards isobutanol. That's a potential, $20 billion plus market. But then you can expand into other markets that really open up the full true potential of synthetic biology, which is what investors, get attracted to. So I want to leave it always last word with the two of you. Anything else, any other comments you want to make about the technology, the collaboration, future predictions of who might win the White House? Now we'll save that for a different. But gentlemen, I do. Floor is yours for the last, and then we'll wrap.
I just want to say, I think that being part of this Shell Game Changer has not just enabled us to the visibility and the recognition that's afforded with it, but it's also a testament to Yannick and his hard work and how good his team is. That Shell has recognized NREL and what they can bring to the table and how that can push things forward as well. And we really are thankful for this opportunity to be a part of it. And yeah, I mean, I know this is just part of how we work together, and I know we'll continue to work together on projects in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, and again, I wanted to thank Game Changer for this project. I think personally for me, it was a great experience as well, right? Dealing with the company directly, seeing how we can help, how we can have impact, right? The research we do sometimes is fundamental, just seeing how that translates. I think it was a big deal for me. So I'm happy to be part of it. As I said, I'm looking for many years of sharing ideas with Tyler and Invizyne, and again, seeing how we can have impact. Can we actually do something for this new bioeconomy, right? And offset all of those, petroleum-derived products that we always make. That that has to stop at some point. So I think we're on the right track.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to thank you both. I always say that you can't fake sincerity, and it's clear that you both sincerely enjoy working with each other and the team, the collaboration. I sincerely thank you for taking the time on a Friday in the middle of summer. So next time I'm actually in California or in the same spot, drinks are on me for the first round as a small token of appreciation. And more than anything, I really appreciate you just giving perspective, right? So this is, as we look at the mosaic of how we consider the opportunity here for Invizyne, I know that for me, it's been helpful, and hopefully for the rest of the audience, it'll be helpful for them to grasp the science, the opportunity, and the importance of having someone like NREL and the validation that comes from that, and the work and the work that you've done in your career too. So with that being said, thank you both. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll hopefully see each other soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Lou. Yep.